Hi there, today I just wanted to do another demonstration for you on Damit. It's our dam and pond sealing polymer. We've been asked a lot of questions about this product and how it works, and today we've been asked by a customer to come and help assist with a leaking dam. This is fairly newly constructed, not ideal situations here in terms of the soil porosity and also the location, but what we're going to do is show you how we apply the product and how you can increase the chances of holding water in a really difficult site like this. So it's a powder that we basically apply over the surface with something like a seed spreader. Very straightforward process. And what we're going to do today, we find one of the biggest issues with application is most people want to stand on the edge of the dam and throw it in. Most of the issues are caused by deeper areas, which are typically further out. So what we're suggesting is that you're actually using something like a canoe, or if it's a shallow dam, you actually wade out. You want to try and throw it from the middle back towards the sides, as most of the polymer will fall closer to you. If you try and throw it too far, you end up with the larger particles, which are about the same size as sugar. They end up going further, and the dust or the finer particles stays close to you. So we're doing a couple of things to prepare this. We're actually removing some vegetation, and you can see there's a lot of trees, there's palm fronds and things falling in here. We want to try and remove vegetation because that can affect the polymer and its ability to get to the bottom. It needs to actually come into contact with the soil to do its job properly. So we're just removing some palm fronds and things that are lying in the dam here. But the other thing I wanted to show you is the soil. So typically before you constructed a dam, you'd actually do some sort of soil analysis. So if I look at this, we've actually got a very, very open sandy soil. So there's a little bit of clay in there, which is that sort of tanny beigey colour, but this is a very, very sandy soil, and there's also a lot of rock. This is like a crumbly rock which is scattered throughout. So what we're going to find here is, as this was excavated, you're going to be hitting seams of this sort of product, and that allows a path for the water to travel through. So typically what would happen when you built a dam like this is you do a soil assessment. If the soil assessment suggested that it's not going to hold water, you'd bring in a conditioning product like a clay, typically a bentonite clay. You'd compact that, and then what you'd do is you'd cover and you'd fill it with water, and you'd be fine. What's happened in this situation is the contractor has given the owner some bad advice. He's basically dug a hole, a very deep hole. The soil conditions are not ideal. There's been no extra material brought in to help improve the soil holding capacity. And so what's happening is this dam is leaking very quickly. It's actually being fed by a natural spring, which is back up that way, and it's draining down. So the level is not too bad at the moment, but it is dropping quite quickly, and we've just had a lot of heavy rain due to a cyclone over the last week or so. So the level is still high, but it's dropping quickly. But what we're going to do today, we're actually going to show how our product can improve the soil holding capacity, but we're actually, because this is such a difficult situation, we've suggested to the owner that they introduce some bentonite clay as well. So our polymer will certainly help bind all of the fine particles up, the clays and the silts, but it needs some material to work with. If you were trying to hold water in pure sand, you're really up against it. You need some finer particles to block those pores, and by introducing some bentonite, that's going to help us do it. So we'll show you a demonstration where we've basically put a couple of star pickets in and run a couple of ropes across. That's going to help us mark out a nice even track so that we can make sure that the product is evenly applied across the surface. That's important, because if I dumped it all around the edge and I put nothing in the middle, that polymer isn't actually going where it needs to go to stop the water. So we'll set up and just start doing the demonstration, show you how it's applied, and if you evenly cover the surface, it settles down to the bottom. It'll actually help flocculate all of the bentonite clay, which we're going to place some bags of bentonite in afterwards, and that will help seal this up. So given that it's already full of water, it's very difficult to stop a leaking situation like this purely with bentonite. Bentonite needs to be compacted, and it's typically applied during the construction phase, and that's where the Damit polymer can really help. That if you've already filled and you've got water, You don't have to drain that, bring in your excavator and rework this. You can actually salvage this situation by applying the polymer over the surface and getting this dam to hold water. So we'll now get set up and just show you how we do that, applying it from a canoe. The sections that we can apply from the bank, and then obviously there's sections that we're applying here in the deeper sections. Okay, so you are going to need to have a good shower after this. It's very slimy, and it's also important that you keep it dry until you're ready to use it. But I'm going to be covered. You can see my legs are covered in it. But it is non-toxic. It washes off. You'll need a lot of water to wash it off. And you can see that it's almost forming a net over the surface. You can see that sort of white layer. Now, that will naturally sink over time. Just slow a little bit, Josh. That'll naturally sink over time as the polymer wets out, but that's giving us the ability to see that we're forming a nice even coverage. Now you can, if that stays on the surface for a period of time, you can agitate it by splashing the water or sprinkling with a garden hose or something, putting a pump, and what that will do is that wets out the surface and then it basically sinks. Okay. So you can see the polymer is actually blowing a little way away from us. It's actually, there's a finer powder and a larger particle about the size of a grain of sugar. And it's important that you get even coverage. So just seen a big gust of wind. Wind is one of the biggest problems when you're applying this. Obviously you need to keep it dry, so you don't want to be doing that when it's raining. But wind can also be a problem, because what happens is the larger granules end up going where they should, and the finer particles get blown away. So try and do it when it's quite still and there's not a lot of wind, and that'll give you the best result. You can see here that we've got almost sheets of it across the surface. That's the effect that you want, and it will basically form a net. So you can see that almost forms like one large slime net. Don't worry about how this looks now. That'll pull itself down to the bottom. We're actually going to throw some bentonite clay over the top of it as well, and this will help pull the bentonite clay down and form a nice solid plug along the bottom. So yes, it's a little bit slippery, and it's not the nicest feeling when you're applying it, but it washes off really easily with water. You just need lots of water to wash it off. It's not toxic, it's not going to hurt fish or aquatic life. But what we do suggest is, if you've got aquatic life in your dam, maybe add some food to one side of the dam, do your application to the other side, and then reverse the process a little while later. That gives the fish a chance to move out of the area. We're just about finished here now, so we'll just finish the last little piece of this application, and then we'll move on to applying the bentonite over the top. But this will settle out, and it will start settling out. You can actually take it up onto the banks as well. Don't worry too much about whether it all lands in the water. The product will actually sit quite happily in the soil as well. So it's a good idea to just take it up the banks a little bit, and it'll quite happily sit there. If the dam is dry, you probably want to cover with some soil so it doesn't blow away. But when it's wet, it'll attach itself straight to the bottom, and it stays there, and it will withstand multiple wet-dry cycles too. So if your dam level does dry up in summer and it gets rain again, it'll be fine. Another question we get asked with applying dam sealer is, what do I do about vegetation? I've got some weeds and I've got some grasses, what should I be doing? The product itself needs to get to the bottom, and the best way for it to get to the bottom is if there's no obstruction. So a few leaves and other organic matter is not going to prove a problem, but if you've got a heavy organic load, you've got lots of weed or grasses, it's best to remove those before you apply the polymer, so it can actually get to the bottom, because it will form a net as it's doing there, and it will slowly sink. And you can see that just by me splashing the surface, that's causing it to wet out and sink to the bottom. And that's where it does its job. It does its job at the bottom. So while you're applying it, it might look horrible, and it might look like you've got slime everywhere, but as you can see, the moment it wets out and pulls itself down to the bottom, you've got no visible signs that the polymer is even there and doing its job at the bottom. So just give it a bit of a splash, or spray a hose over it It's enough to wet it out, and that will cause it to sink down to the bottom where it does its job. But we've certainly got a bit of a wash up here. You can see it's all over me, it's all over the canoe. It's very sticky and slimy, so just be careful when you're handling it, because it is a slip hazard if you get it on your feet and it's wet. But as I said, it'll wash off quite easily with lots of water. It's not a toxic product. Okay, so we've finished applying the dam sealer polymer around the dam, and in most of the case that has sunk. There's still a little bit on the surface, but generally it's settling out, and over the next 24 to 48 hours it'll work its way down to the bottom, and it'll be all active at the bottom. But just wanted to show you how poor the soil is here. So there's some sections that are actually have a reasonable amount of clay, and you can see that by rolling that into a ball. See here, this is quite slimy. That's because the polymer is actually making it all stick together. But normally you'd actually be able to squeeze out a little sausage like that, and if it's breaking in sections, you know that you don't have enough clays and fines and silts to pull that together. But there's a section here where it is literally just sand, and that's not going to hold water. There's no way that is going to hold water. So what you might find throughout a dam is that there'll be some areas that actually have really good water holding capacity because they've got plenty of clay, and you might find sandy seams or rocky seams or other areas that are totally porous. Now, during construction, if you find these and obtaining bentonite isn't possible, you can still work the dam sealer polymer into this before you fill the dam. So dam sealer polymer can be used both in dry soil and in wet soil, but where it really excels and differentiates itself from bentonite is that it's much more successful in sealing a leaking dam once you've already got water in the dam, because uncompacted bentonite is less successful at stopping leaks, and you need to use an awful lot of it in order to do the same job. Okay, so we're just about finished applying some bentonite over the top of our polymer to help it bring it to the bottom, and you can see it's not a job you do in your Sunday best. It's a little bit messy, but one thing I did want to explain, there's various grades of bentonite available. This is a powdered bentonite, which is probably easier to find. It is a little bit harder to apply, and it's typically used to put into the soil. So a granular bentonite is easier when you're applying it over the surface like this. Granular bentonites are typically used in drilling, mining and drilling. A little bit harder to find, but certainly easier to apply. So you might look at the surface of this dam and say we've made an absolute mess, but don't worry, it looks bad now. It will take about 24 to 48 hours for all of this to settle out. There's already some sections you can see back there that are quite open, where the polymer is pulling all of that bentonite down to the bottom. It's forming a plug, and that should seal leaks with this dam. So that shows you how to apply the product, a nice even coverage across the surface. But to give you an idea, this is a 20 kilo bag of bentonite, and the suggested rate for application over a sandy soil is around about 30 kilos per square metre. So we'd need 1.5 bags for a small area. The Damit polymer, the suggested application rate is 1 litre per 10 square metres. So you need an awful lot less of the polymer, and often you'll find you've got a leak. It's a marginal situation that the soil just isn't quite holding water, and all it takes is a little bit of the polymer to actually establish a new equilibrium and bring your water level up. But if you're going to bring in bentonite, you really need to use it at higher ratios, otherwise you're wasting your time, you're just sprinkling a bit of dust around. But to this area, we've got about 20 kilo bags, so 400 kilos just to this small area. But we've done that because we know this soil is extremely marginal. It's basically all sand, there's very little clay in it, and the only reason that it's really holding any water is because it's fed by a natural spring that's continually pushing water in. But you can see the palm trees there. It's not far from the dunes. This is a coastal area, not something that you'd typically be building a dam in, but this is where the owner wanted it, this is where the contractor built it, and we've now been asked to help solve that problem using the Damit polymer. So if you've got a situation where you're not able to hold water in your dam or pond, give it a try. It's a little bit of work, but it's certainly less trouble than draining all your water, bringing in earthworking equipment and basically reworking everything. And for a small investment in time and money, you'll find that you can get your dam looking the way it should be, which is full after it rains. Okay. Stay. Okay.